what was Einstein's metaphysics? Beyond just his famous physics, what was his metaphysical view of the universe? He subscribed to non-duality, the way that Spinoza described it, which is, again, hand in glove. Atman is Brahman. The individual self is the universal self. The individual soul is the cosmic soul. As it is translated into modern English, Atman is Brahman. That's a tweet it was tweeted within maybe the last year from Sam Altman, the co-founder of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. And he tweeted out, what's a question or what's something that you believe? This is a famous question that Peter Thiel would ask people in interview questions, interview settings to understand if someone's an independent thinker or not. And he would ask, what's something that you believe that no one around you believes? Something that you feel strongly about, that you don't have any peers that agree with you on, but doesn't bother you, does not get in the way of you believing it. So Sam Altman tweeted this out about a year ago, asking people that same question. What's something you believe that no one around you believes? And there's a bunch of interesting answers. And he said, right under that, I'll go first. Said, Atman is unequivocally Brahman, which took a lot of people by surprise. It's not expected for a Silicon Valley tech CEO in his 30s to tweet out something like that Atman is Brahman, in the context of what is usually kind of techno Twitter and tweets and conversations about technological trends. So that got passed around in a bunch of circles, and it gave a bit of a boost in the interest towards the Vedantic philosophy. Sam studies Vedanta and has a copy of Vedanta Treatise, actually right behind the camera. He has a copy of that book that I sent him years ago, and we text back and forth about Vedanta every once in a while. But what is interesting, and this came up in a recent Venice Vedanta Club meeting, is so many brilliant physicists. We've chatted in different episodes about different literary titans, especially American literary titans, that loved this philosophy. Emerson, Thoreau, Margaret Fuller had an amazing newsletter. She's the godmother of the feminist movement in America in the 19th century. And we've chatted about those literary titans before. We've covered the philosophical titans, Schopenhauer, Berkeley. You have Socrates and the allegory of the cave, which is hand in glove with what this philosophy is saying. Being entranced by shadows on the wall, thinking that is reality, and then ascending up the cave and seeing light for the first time. Real light, blinding light, aka enlightenment, and seeing the world in 3 dimensions, a whole new dimension. And that's the allegory of the cave. Coming down and trying to tell people about it, and everybody else in the cave having no clue what that person's talking about. Still convinced, no, this wall and these shadows from the fire behind us, these shadows, this wall, that's all there is to this universe. So we've chatted about literary figures, we've chatted about philosophical, just the philosophical titans throughout human history. And things like Schopenhauer saying there's no higher wisdom in humanity than the Upanishads. But we've never really chatted about the scientific giants. You have someone like Erwin Schrödinger, who is a famous physicist that was convinced of the monistic, the monism of the universe, the oneness of the universe, convinced of specifically Advaita Vedanta as an accurate depiction, explanation spanning 5,000 plus years before the physics discoveries of his time that he contributed to mightily, that in the quantum mechanics of our universe seem to suggest a oneness, a monism, a non-dualism, a not two, in the midst of what we think are separate atoms, separate particles, separate beings, separate entities. There seems to be a oneness in the substance. You have Einstein, not just a titan, maybe the titanic mind, the giant of the last 200 years globally, who believed in Spinoza's God, Spinoza being a non-dualist as well, Baroque Spinoza from the Enlightenment period, which is a very different Enlightenment. The Enlightenment period that for most of human history is, in the last 500 years, has largely been forgotten. He's kind of a footnote in the pop cultural discussions of the Enlightenment period, of the Renaissance. He's not a key figure in the conversations that we have where we talk about the artists or thinkers of that time, the philosophers. But Einstein led to a rediscovery, has led in many ways, he's just continues to, as people want to see what was Einstein's metaphysics beyond just his famous physics. What was his metaphysical view of the universe? And he subscribed to non-duality in the way that Spinoza described it, which is, again, hand in glove, very closely aligns. I mean, if anything's not, there's not too many interpretations of non-duality. If there is a view that is called non-dual, oneness, there is just oneness, our monistic substance that pervades the universe in the sea of perceived plurality, this perception of separateness. There is a oneness beneath it all. All of the non-dualistic philosophies, by definition, if it's not two and pointing to oneness, are very similar. So Spinoza and Einstein, you have Schrödinger, who even named his dog Atman, by the way, because he was so influenced by this philosophy. And then you have Oppenheimer, who famously quoted the Gita at the successful explosion and splitting of the atom in the 40s. Maybe the most impactful application of science in a couple hundred years, the splitting of the atom and creating the nuclear bomb, but also creating nuclear energy is, or I should say harnessing, because nuclear energy is powering the universe. I mean, the sun is nuclear energy. We wouldn't be here without it. But harnessing it came down to this titanic mind of J. Robert Oppenheimer in the 40s. Between Oppenheimer, Einstein, Schrödinger, you have the literary geniuses, the philosophical geniuses, and the scientific geniuses of the last few hundred years, all circling around this same idea, captivated by this same idea where their work, their observation, their independent thought seems to corroborate what is, in terms of continuous study, the oldest philosophical idea in humanity. That in the apparent and perceived separateness, there is oneness. It's not just a pattern amongst these geniuses. It is this concept that just comes back again and again and again culturally. Rediscovered. Over and over. It's why over the last 5,000 plus years, there have been philosophies that have come and gone, philosophical concepts that have come and gone. studied for 200-300 years. That's a long, long time. That's, lasts longer than nearly every company, nearly every empire. Very few human ideas, companies, structures, buildings last 200 or 300 years, but for something to last a few thousand, there's a wonderment in why it just keeps coming back, but even more so and amplified by the fact that you have these crazy outperformers in their fields that happen to also be captivated by a philosophical notion that is so far from anything in the mainstream, yet they keep finding it, discovering it, and telling everybody about it. Schrödinger was quite open with his views on Vedanta. J.D. Salinger, great author that then went basically recluse and in hiding and stopped producing works that we know about. Some people hypothesize that after his death, one day there's just going to be 50 books that are released. But one of the best 20th century writers, author of Catcher in the Rye, would weave in characters like Vivekananda into his works. Obviously, you have the Emerson quote, the Thoreau quote that I quote often on this podcast of, in the early morning hours, I bathe my intellect in the cosmogonal philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. This morning, I was curious and looked up a few facts about Schrödinger and his ties to Vedanta. And here were some of the facts that came up in the research. Erwin Schrödinger, the father of quantum wave mechanics, was deeply influenced by Vedantic philosophy, particularly Advaita Vedanta, which asserts the unity of all existence. So Vedanta is end of the Vedas. Vedanta means end of the Vedas. The Upanishads are at the end of the Vedas. So Vedanta is synonymous with the Upanishads. And that's the philosophical portion of the Vedas, the 4 oldest philosophical textbooks in the world. Advaita Vedanta is non-dual end of the Vedas. So non-dual, this is way too much Sanskrit. No. This is probably too much Sanskrit, but I'm going to break each one of these terms down. Advaita being non-dual end of knowledge, non-dual end of the Vedas. The Vedas, Veda is Sanskrit for knowledge. But that's the first thing that I found, that he was captivated by this philosophy that asserts the unity of all existence, and his work seemed to corroborate and confirm this notion. He was not merely intrigued, but philosophically committed to the idea that consciousness is singular and universal, not just a oneness, but that oneness is conscious, and even more, consciousness is that singular and one substance of the universe, which is a core tenet of non-duality that mirrors the Vedantic identity of Atman with Brahman, individual self, and the universal consciousness. Schrödinger openly rejected the materialist worldview of Western science and believed that true understanding of reality could only come from the inner subjective experience, the I that persists in every conscious being. In a striking personal gesture, he named his dog Atman. This is what we were discussing a few days ago of what he had named his. In the Venice Vedanta Club, I couldn't remember if it was Atman or Brahman that he named his dog. He named it Atman, the Sanskrit word for the innermost self, reflecting his deep resonance with Vedantic teachings that the self is not separate, but part of the eternal and unified consciousness. Schrödinger once wrote, "There is obviously only one alternative, namely the unification of minds or consciousnesses. Their multiplicity is only apparent," capturing the essence of non-duality in a single sentence. The most useful of ideas and notions in our lives don't often require any co-signing from famous individuals. But it doesn't hurt. And when you look at some of the all-time greatest questioners, explorers, thoughtful, scientific, philosophical, literary individuals in human history. It is fun and always surprising to me, actually, to see all of these people in these unrelated fields, unrelated cultures, come to a very similar conclusion, not through reading, but through their own inner exploration and experience. And the cognitive scientist, John Vervaeke, that we've chatted about on this podcast before, we've actually had him here in Venice for a talk and recorded that, released that as an episode. But the renowned cognitive scientist, John Vervaeke, once said that the philosophy of the future will need to make space, will need to be an umbrella for the best of philosophy, the best of science, and the best of religion. Or else it won't survive. And it is so fascinating that this philosophy of the future might actually be the philosophy of the past in something like Advaita Vedanta. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic, and we'll see you next time.